The Republic of Croatia is a country geographically situated in the area between Central and Southeastern Europe. Croatia borders with Slovenia and Hungary in the north, with Serbia in the east, with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro in the south and east. It has a sea border with Italy. Throughout the Croatian history, the most significant cultural influences have been coming from the Central European and Mediterranean cultural circle. The capital is Zagreb, which is an economic, cultural and political center of Croatia. According to the 2001 census, Croatia has a population of 4,437,460. Croats make nearly 90% of the population. The land area of Croatia totals 56,542 square kilometers, and the area of the territorial sea 31,067 square kilometers. Politically, Croatia is a parliamentary democracy. It has been a member of the United Nations since May 22, 1992. It is also a member of the European Council, a full-fledged member of NATO and a candidate member for accession to the European Union since 2004. In the 10th century, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitus wrote about the arrival of Croats into today's homeland in his work, De Administrando Imperio, and stated that the Croats settled there at the beginning of the 7th century, following the invitation of the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, so that they could help him as a war alliance to fight the Avars. The newly come Croats were pagans who were to accept Christianity soon upon their settlement. It is generally believed that the connections between Croats and Rome were established in the year 641. In this first contact, a major role was played by Abbot Martin. He had been sent to Dalmatia and Istria by Pope John IV with a lot of money in order to buy back captured Christians and collect martyrs' relics and bring them to Rome. Abbot Martin belonged, most likely, to the Benedictine order, to which a lot of other papal legates sent to Croatian sovereigns also belonged. At the beginning of the 9th century, Croatia fell under the Frankish rule. Very soon, the religious, priests and bishops from the Frankish Republic started arriving. The Frankish monks were probably the first to organize the Western monasteries in Croatia. The oldest Croatian monastery, which can be historically documented with certainty, is the one built by Prince Trpimir near Solin in the middle of the 9th century. The famous Saxon Gottschalk found a shelter and lived there from 846 to 848, so it is believed that it is precisely following the initiative of this enterprising monk that Prince Trpimir invited the Benedictines into his state. At the beginning of the 9th century, among the citizens of Zadar who got out to shore to welcome St. Anastasius' relics having arrived from Constantinopolis, there were nuns too. Following the example of the rest of the Christian Europe, which was full of Benedictines, the Croatian sovereigns also either founded new or richly endowed the existing monasteries. In the second half of the 11th century, all our royal monasteries were founded, as well as a few votive endowments of Croatian dignitaries. Queen Jelena entrusted to the Benedictines the tombs of the Croatian sovereigns and the Church of St. Stephen in Solin. At the end of the 11th century, Benedictine monks and nuns could be found at about 40 places in various parts of our country, and in the 13th century there was as many as 100 certain or likely Benedictine locations in our regions. Throughout the stormy centuries, the Benedictine monasteries in Croatia have been through various hardships. The ruin of the Croatian dynasty and a centuries-long foreign rule have left their trace on the life of the Benedictine abbeys in the Croatian regions. After Napoleonic wars, the last male monasteries having been abolished, the nuns were left without any counselor or teacher of their order and tradition. Under the French and Austrian rule, numerous monasteries were closed down, and at the beginning of the 20th century, a monastic Benedictine life was led in 9 abbeys. After the World War II, 8 nunneries continued to be active, and a Benedictine male monastery on Čokovac was also revived. In the post-war circumstances, new ways and forms of activity had to be found. The education of the youth was a field bent to the sisters, and their nunnery schools were closed down. The monasteries were deprived of all their property. Sometimes even the most essential needs could not be met. However, in the newly created circumstances of the communist regime, over almost 50 years, the nuns lived their quiet and humble life, faithful to God and the Church. During the Croatian War of Independence, the nuns demonstrated the Christian charity. They shared the destiny of their people, some even as refugees. Not only did they open their hearts, but also the doors of their nunneries to the numerous people in need, witnessing once again their commitment to God and their neighbors. In Croatia today, the Benedictine nuns live in 8 Benedictine monasteries as the witness of hope, filled with love that casts out fear, wishing that God in all things may be glorified, also through their prayer and work. The island of Krk is the biggest of all the 1,246 islands Croatia has. Since 1980, the island of Krk has been connected with the mainland via the Krk Bridge. The island of Krk has been called the cradle of Glagolitic script due to the fact that through the history it took extraordinary root on Krk and resiliently resisted time. The Baška plate, dating most likely from the year 1105, was named for a good reason, a prestigious Croatian stone of the Croatian language. It was found on the island of Krk in a little church of St. Lucia at Jurandvor near Baška, built by 2 Benedictine abbots on the land given to them by King Zvonimir. It is important for the Croatian history as it is the first document in Croatian mentioning a Croatian sovereign. The town of Krk, the main settlement on the island of the same name, belongs to those towns in Croatia where, with every step taken, one encounters the traces of its millennia-long past. The expansion of the Roman Empire onto the east coast of the Adriatic turned Krk into a prominent Roman settlement, municipium. The preserved urban town entity from the Roman period within the town walls that got their today's appearance between the 12th and 15th century is beautiful and valuable. The sites of the town of Krk by all means include Kamplin Square with Frankopan Castle and the square tower from the 12th century. The main town square of Vela Plaza with the 15th century town hall and a Renaissance well are a recognizable town motif. Within the Roman town, the early Christian community first had their oratory, which grew into an early Christian basilica in the 5th century. In the 12th century, the present cathedral in a Romanesque style was built. The unique sacral complex comprises the cathedral and the 3 apse and 3-nave Romanesque church of St. Quirinus, patron saint of the Krk town and diocese, built in the 12th century. The construction of the bell tower in the 16th and its restoration in the 18th gave today's appearance to this sacred complex and completed its centuries-long formation. Along with the Krk diocese, Kvarner for centuries also comprised the Osor and Rab dioceses, which were abolished by the Locum Beati Petri, bull of Pope Leo XII, and annexed to the Krk diocese. Its patron saint is Saint Quirinus, bishop and martyr from the 4th century, and the co-patron saints Saint Gaudientius, also bishop from the 11th century, and Saint Christopher, old Christian martyr. In the Krk diocese, the Benedictine nuns live and act in 3 monasteries, in Krk, Cres and Rab. On the hill of the town, once filled with monasteries, next to the monastery of Glagolitic Franciscans, there is also a monastery of Benedictine nuns. The monastery was raised and arranged around the Church of St. Mary of Angel. The history of the monastery goes back to as early as 1223. The information on the monastery is quite scarce, and the first records of its date from the 15th and 16th centuries. In a preserved will from 1348, the church was mentioned, so it may be believed that at the time it had the same shape and size as today. In the year 1780, the building was renovated in the Baroque style, and that is also when the altar by the famous master Sebastian Petrucci was also put up. The new altar was dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary raised into the heaven, so the whole church was named after this new altar. The bell tower was added around the year 1800. At first, the monastery took in only the Krk noblewoman, but later it also took in women of the people, just like all the other monasteries in these regions. Due to the tighter control of the authorities over the church at the time of the Venetian rule of the island, there was a period when visiting monasteries was banned to the Krk bishop, so the preveditor appointed and the doge confirmed the abbess of the monastery. Therefore, there are not many pieces of information on the life of Krk nuns in the monastery or the diocese. All this caused the hardships this monastic community has courageously overcome, confiding in the Lord. At the beginning of the 17th century, 2 nuns came from the island of Cres upon the bishop's invitation and helped revive the Benedictine monastic life in the Krk monastery. The nuns acted as teachers in the all-girls elementary school in their monastery for a full 100 years, from 1802 to 1903. After the First World War, they ran a boarding house for the students of a town grammar school. With the arrival of the communist regime, the sisters were forced to look for new forms of activity and sources of income. Throughout the history, the nuns have promoted the value of human work, no matter whether it's weaving, needlework, the making of the church robes, baking of hosts, or at its recognizable activity for this monastery today, cultivating of the monastery garden and selling of the garden products. During the past 2 decades, the Krk nuns have persistently, bravely worked on the renovation of the church and monastery buildings with the help of numerous benefactors. The 6 Krk nuns live today just like centuries ago, a humble life of prayer and work before the face of God Almighty. They live simply and joyfully in a hope that will not put them to shame. Under the guidance and through the intercession of Saint Benedict, they daily offer their life to God. The town of Cres is situated in the northeast part of the spacious and sheltered bay of the island of the same name, abounding in beautiful beaches. The northern and northeastern slopes of the Cres Bay end with fertile soil and olive trees at the bottom. The population lives from agriculture, fishery and tourism. Human activity has left a number of monuments in this region since the antiquity. From the 9th century, Cres was part of Croatia all until the 15th century, when it was conquered by Venice. Throughout its stormy past, the town was under the rule of Venice, France, Austria-Hungary and Italy. After the World War II, it was a part of communist Yugoslavia. Today, it is a part of the Republic of Croatia. In the 16th century, Venice built a new, partly preserved town wall. In the harbour, where most public buildings and noblemen's palaces were built, one can single out the town gates with a clock tower from the 16th century and next to it a municipal loggia. Through the town gates, one arrives to the square with the Gothic and Renaissance church of St. Mary from the 15th century and the separate bell tower. Until the end of the Venetian era, Cres was situated exclusively within the town walls, and out of the town there were only two monasteries, Franciscan and Benedictine. Great changes occurred with the development of the shipping trade and shipbuilding in the middle 19th century. The complex of the Benedictine monastery of St. Peter the Apostle is situated on the shore, a few hundred meters south of the town. The oldest data on this monastery can be found in the archives of the town of Cres from the year 1200, from which it is obvious that a female Benedictine monastery existed in Cres. Throughout its 800-year-old history, the monastery has been destroyed in a fire 4 times and managed to get revived again. In the Cres monastery, there used to be periods with up to 40 nuns, and as such it was more numerous than all the other female Benedictine monasteries in Croatia. And just as in some other monasteries, there were also times when there was only one nun in the monastery. In the second half of the 18th century, the monastery of St. Peter in Cres was the home of Giacoma Georgia Colombis, who was also its abbess and died in the Cres monastery with the reputation of a saint. In the monastery church of St. Peter the Apostle, one can see the tracks of various time periods and styles. The exuberance of the Romanesque stone arches, Baroque altars in the side naves, and modern stained glass windows create an atmosphere in which the mystery of Lord's presence is lived as a reality. In the church core there is an organ with 15 registers of the builder Francesco Dacci from 1777. In the presbyterium above the main altar there is a valuable altar pala of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary with St. Peter and other saints. One's attention will also be drawn to the renewed tabernacle as well as a beautiful wooden crucifix. In the monastery rooms, valuable paintings and icons are kept, and in the library, 2 15th century codes written in Gothic script, parts of the Book of Rites for taking vows and a psalter. Various objects make an exceptionally rich collection with ethnographic items the nuns have carefully collected and kept through the centuries. What is most notable is a large number of wooden polychromated sculptures from the Renaissance and Baroque periods, mass robes and archaeological finds. Following the monastic Benedictine tradition, the Cres nuns deal with the education of young girls in the past, until 1945, when the communist authorities banned their educational activity. The nuns have tried hard ever since to glorify God and make their living by work of their hands. In a monastery garden, the nuns grow vegetables, fruits and flowers. In the garden, there is also a meteorological station, from where the nuns have diligently reported on the weather conditions for 30 years. In a peaceful corner by the church wall, there is a monastery cemetery. In 1989, the nuns of Cres opened the door of their monastery to guests, who in the communion of prayer and work with them find peace and rest. In this way, the community lives their monastic apostolate, witnessing the Christian openness for the needs of the modern man. Faithful to the words of Saint Benedict, they welcome the guest and attend to them in the spirit of the Gospel. Today, in the Stres monastery, 10 nuns, 1 novice and 1 postulant, following the rule of Saint Benedict, daily renew their commitment to the Lord through the joy and sacrifice of prayer and work. The town of Rab was first mentioned as early as the ancient times, and in the 70s AD it was mentioned by Pliny the Elder under the name of Arba. A little over 2000 years ago, the Liburnian settlement was recognized as a Roman city. Thanks to its geographical position at the junction of the sea routes, the town of Rab became a commercial and traffic center. The island was a place of salt production and quarrying special white and red stone for decorating the buildings of sacred and civil purpose. It is interesting to note that on the island of Rab, silk used to be produced, and the town of Rab used to pay its annual tribute to Venice in silk. Rab also became the center of Christian living and a diocese quite early, so the Rab Bishop Titian was mentioned as early as the year 530 as a participant in the Salona Synod. The Rab diocese was active until 1828, when it was abolished and annexed to the Kirk diocese. The early Christian period also gave the person of Saint Martin from Rab, who fled from Diocletian's persecutions to today's Italy and founded today's well-known city-state of San Marino. The patron saint of Rab is Saint Christopher. The 4 Rab belfries, located in Gornja Ulica, Upper Street, bear witness to the rich and stormy past of the town of Rab. At the end of Gornja Ulica, there is today the parish church of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, formerly the Rab Cathedral. Its oldest parts date from 5th century, and its construction in today's shape started in 1118. Pope Alexander III consecrated it in 1177 during his visit to Rab. It is a magnificent Romanesque basilica with a ciborium from the 8th century. The former cathedral's belfry is at a distance from the church and dominates the town, ranking high on the list of the top late Romanesque buildings in Croatia. The Benedictine monastery with the Church of St. Andrew, founded in the course of the 11th century, rises directly out of the cliffs by the shore in St. Euphemia's Inlet. The monastery was established for girls from the noble families of Rab. Some historians mention this took place in 1123, but it remains undocumented. The first written record testifying the ancient history of this monastery is the inscription on the belfry, mentioning by name the abbess Ivana. The simple Romanesque belfry was built in 1181, and it is the oldest of the 4 Rab belfries. This bell tower also hides one of the oldest bells in this region, founded in Venice in 1396. The monastery church of St. Andrew is a proto-Romanesque 3-nave basilica built in the 11th century, commissioned by Bishop Madius, whose name was carved as an inscription at the church doorstep. It was renovated in the 14th century and thoroughly reconstructed in the middle 15th century. In the 18th century, the church was renewed in the Baroque style. That is the period from which the wooden Baroque altar dates, the work of Venetian masters with an altar pala by painter Novelli. The wooden figures at the sides show Saint Benedict and Saint Andrew the Apostle. Above the altar, in the divided northern apse, there is a valuable late Renaissance wooden crucifix. To the right side from the main altar in the church nave, there is an altar of Mother of God, who has been worshipped in the monastery and across the islands of our miraculous Lady of Rab since 16th century. The Creto-Byzantine icon of Madonna with Christ in her lap dates from the 16th century. The silver and gilded frame of the icon is a valuable piece of work created by Venetian goldsmiths from the 18th century. At the entrance into the monastery chapel, there is a valuable Creto-Venetian icon of the Morning of Christ, tempered wood, from the second half of the 16th century. In the monastery yard, a dozen of Asian, early Christian, Romanesque and Renaissance stone fragments and inscriptions are kept. In the monastery library, apart from the spiritual literature, valuable old documents, manuscripts and parchments are kept. Throughout the history, the nuns of this monastery have done various jobs besides prayer. They used to raise and teach the children of the Rab noblemen. In more recent times, they ran a girls' school of needlework. They kept silkworms, spun silk, made the finest fabrics and made their living with their own hands. The Benedictine monastery in Rab is also the place of origin of the Rab cake. The cake, which was according to the oral tradition made by the nuns on the occasion of the visit of Pope Alexander III to Rab in 1177, has been copied and recopied and has survived in its original form until the present time. The Benedictine nuns of St. Andrew are faithful to their mission of prayer and work. The prayer, cherished and carefully prepared, makes the center of their daily routine. Allowing for others too to participate in their prayer and meditation in the atmosphere of monastic peace, the sisters offer monastic hospitality. The nuns cultivate a garden, make hosts, paint icons, make various souvenirs and special occasion gifts. Just like almost 1,000 years ago, the 9 nuns of the Rab monastery, as the guardians of their town walls, advocate for the needs of their town of Rab and the world through their prayer and work, praying that God should pour His blessing on all, upon the intercession of Saint Benedict. The inhabitants of Pag moved to the site today known as Stari Grad, Old Town, in the 4th century, following an earthquake which has brought about the sinking of the ancient settlement. The citizens of Pag were sailors, and they also made their living by fishing, cattle breeding, trade and salt production. Stari Grad was urbanized, surrounded by walls, with beautiful churches, monasteries and shops. In the year 1318, Juran and Milica Pogancic built a Benedictine monastery and a church in the honor of St. Margherita, northeast of the great church in the old town of Pag. At the request of the founders, having furnished the monastery, the Zadar Archbishop gives the permission for a few nuns to be invited from St. Mary's Monastery in Zadar. In the middle 15th century, the Turkish threat was getting bigger and bigger, so on May 18, 1443, the people of Pag started building a new town at the place where it still stands today. The planning solutions for the new town respected the principles of the then architecture and town planning, and the plans were made in Venice. The great architect and sculptor Juraj Dalmatinac participated in the elaboration of town plans. On September 18, 1474, the people of Pag, led by their prince, moved into the new town of Pag in a solemn procession. In the year 1483, the Benedictine monastery and church in the new town of Pag were completed. The church was dedicated to the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and the monastery to Saint Margherita, Virgin and Martyr, in the memory of the monastery and church in the old town of Pag. Life in the Benedictine monastery of Saint Margherita in Pag has always been an exemplary one. Only the Croatian language has always been used in the monastery. The number of nuns has varied from 3 to 20. The nuns have developed very rich and diverse activities, especially educational for girls starting from 1579. The Benedictine nuns also used to teach lace making, and their lace work was sold to Venetians and later to Austrians. It was thanks to them that lace weaving spread through the town of Pag and became an important source of income for a lot of Pag families. In the year 1807, during the French invasion, children were taught how to read, write, as well as do the needlework, especially lace work. In the monastery, an all-girls elementary school was active with professional nun teachers. In the year 1919, the first private nursery was opened in St. Margherita's monastery, also run by trained nuns, and during the World War II, between 1941 and 1945, the monastery organized meals for children and the poor. During the Croatian War of Independence in the years 1991 to 1995, the Pag nuns shared once again most difficult moments with the population of town of Pag, as well as displaced persons and refugees. They welcomed and provided accommodation to numerous displaced persons and refugees, as well as distributed medications, food, clothes and footwear. In the years 1999 to 2000, the Benedictine nuns started a thorough renovation of the monastery church and the part of the derelict monastery, investing in the tasks, their organizational, working and material potential. Today the church features the 18th century main altar, St. Benedict's Chapel and a marble altar of Our Lady of Mercy, as well as the family Mišolić tomb in the Mišolić Chapel. In the yard, a large well stands prominent with a crown brought over the old town of Pag. The monastery keeps valuable objects of arts and crafts. The most important one is naturally the reliquary of the Holy Thorn from 1435, followed also by a silver altar crucifix from the 14th century, known as St. Benedict's crucifix, which is attributed to the Zadar worship. St. Clara's reliquary made from golden-plated silver from the 15th century, coming from the Zadar workshop, a Gothic Renaissance monstrance made of gold-plated silver, work of Venetian goldsmiths from the late 15th century, 10 candlesticks in hammered silver brought from the Republic of Venice, a few reliquaries, a Baroque censer and a preserved votive presents to Our Lady of Mercy. Sculpture is represented through several statues representing the Mother of God and wooden crucifix. The statue of Our Lady of Mercy from the chapel of the same name was made in 1626. Today known and protected as an autochthonous Croatian product is also the Pag Baškotin, the aromatic crisp bread that the nuns of St. Margherita prepare according to a traditional recipe older than 300 years. We have seen now how throughout their long history the Benedictine nuns of Pag have prayed and worked with the people of this town and the Zadar archdiocese the town of Pag belongs to. They have cherished and preserved the sacred things they inherited, promoting Christian Benedictine values and the Croatian culture. In the renovated church and monastery, St. Benedict's motto of "Pray and work" still continues to live and be promoted by 8 Benedictine nuns and 1 postulant. Zadar is a town with an over 3,000-year-old history, situated in the center of the Croatian Adriatic. Its rich hinterland and the numerous islands it is surrounded with have been a guarantee of the town's progress and prosperity throughout the history. The first settlers belonged to the tribe of the Liburnians in the 4th century BC. During the Roman reign, it becomes the city of Iadera, later Zara, and in the 7th century becomes the capital of Dalmatia. Throughout its history, it has changed rules, has been destroyed a lot of times, but has always remained a city of culture and beauty, the city where the force of creativity and art has left much deeper track than the force of destruction. The Roman Forum, built from the 1st century BC until the 3rd century, is surrounded from 3 sides by the 9th century church of St. Donatus, symbol of the city, the cathedral of St. Anastasia from the 12th century, and the Benedictine monastery of St. Mary, while its southern side opens up to the beautiful Zadar promenade by the sea, today boasting a monument of modern architecture, the sea organ. The Zadar diocese covers the area of about 3,000 square kilometers and numbers about 150,000 Catholics. One of the best-known Zadar bishops was St. Donatus, the builder of the most monumental pre-Romanesque church of the Holy Trinity in Zadar. He brought St. Anastasia's relics from Constantinople and thus set the foundations of her worship and the patroness saint of the archdiocese. The Zadar Church has twice in its history welcomed St. Peter's successor, the Roman Pope. On March 13, 1177, on his way to Venice, Pope Alexander III stayed in Zadar for 5 days. And in June 2003, Zadar was visited by Pope John Paul II at the Forum in front of the Benedictine monastery of St. Mary. The Benedictine monastery of St. Mary was founded in 1066. By a Zadar noblewoman Chica, who was succeeded at her position of an abbess by her daughter Vekenega, who had her tomb built within the chapter house where she still rests. The large 3-nave church of St. Mary was built in 1091 in the early Romanesque style. Its prettiest part is the campanile, where frescoes have been found, and one of the first cross-ribbed vaults in Europe. Precisely here, in the area of Chapter House, the columns stand bearing the name of Rex Colomanus, the inscription of King Coloman above the bell. The Benedictine monastery in Zadar lived through all the stormy centuries right to the year 1943. The war hardships reached Zadar too, so the Benedictine nuns decided to protect the treasure. In great secrecy, they themselves dug a deep hole below the campanile and stored the treasure into the ground. On December 16, 1943, the Allies started violent bombing of Zadar, destroying almost all of the city in about 70 raids. The nuns took shelter in the Vekenega chapel, as they called the campanile ground floor, while below them There stood the Millennium Treasure. The bombs fell on the church, monastery, chapter house. Everything was destroyed, but no sister was killed, nor any fragment of the collection ruined. After World War II, the nuns were homeless. They moved to the Znajvić seminary and stayed there for 27 years as the government did not allow for the monastery to be reconstructed. Here they prayed for the blessing of going back again, which finally came true on September 27, 1970. The permanent exhibition of religious art was solemnly opened on December 4, 1976. The exhibition encompasses the treasury and a larger number of artworks from the Zadar Cathedral, treasury and the paintings from the Benedictine monastery, as well as valuable goldsmiths' works. The ground floor is intended for the temporary exhibition rooms, as well as for the permanent exhibition of Romanesque sculptures. There is also a reconstructed interior of the Church of St. Nedeljica from the 11th century, a prestigious example of pre-Romanesque architecture. The oldest objects are the little cross reliquary, probably from the 8th century, and two 11th century silver reliquaries of St. James and St. Gregory, which was brought by Abbot Gabison as Pope Legate as a gift to the Croatian King Zvonimir on his coronation day. Among many other reliquaries, there is also the reliquary of the Holy Cross. On the first floor there are works by painters, sculptors and goldsmiths, as well as artistic needlework from the Romanesque and Gothic period. On the second floor there are exhibits from the late Gothic to Baroque period, 15th to 18th century. Paintings and statues prevail, as well as craftswork. Among the paintings, what should be highlighted is the icon of Madonna, which could be attributed to Paolo Venezian, and the triptych of Our Lady of Varos by a domestic author, the painter of the Comte crucifix. The Renaissance polyptych for St. Martin's altar in the cathedral is the work of the famous Venetian painter Vittore Carpaccio. The Baroque works mostly come from Venice. There is also a very valuable lace collection. Even today, after 1,000 years, St. Mary's nuns praise God through their cultivated prayer and devoted work, testifying to the world the love God has for man. In their everyday work, the nuns continue to teach singing. They are also well known as excellent and diligent cake makers. They cherish the sense of beauty and make valuable objects and souvenirs. In the monastery of St. Mary, 19 nuns live their everyday commitment to the Lord under the mighty protection of St. Benedict. On a stone slope 70 meters above the sea, on the northern shore of a spacious natural harbor, the Croatian settlers raised a fortress, Castrum, most likely in the 9th century. Simultaneously with the progress of the medieval Croatian state, an urban settlement was gradually built and developed beneath the fortress. Šibenik was mentioned for the first time in the history on December 25, 1066, in the deed of donation by the Croatian king Petar Krešimir IV, staying in Šibenik at the time. The Šibenik diocese was established on May 1, 1298, by the bull issued by Pope Bonifacius VIII. Today's Diocese of Šibenik covers the area of about 3,300 square kilometers. According to the 1991 census, a population of almost 160,000 lived in the area, 120,000 of whom Catholics. Not only is the Cathedral of St. James the greatest and most precious example of the architectural heritage of Šibenik, but it is a unique monument of European sacred architecture, being on the UNESCO World Heritage List since 2001. Its construction began in 1431 and ended in 1536. Renowned architects Juraj Dalmatinac, Giorgio da Sebenico, and after his death Nicola Fiorentinac, Niccolo di Giovanni da Firenze worked on it. An important date for the diocese and the town was June 21, 1970, when Pope Paul VI canonized Nikola Tavelić, a beatified citizen of Šibenik and a Franciscan, and made him a saint of the Universal Church. The town's historical nucleus abounds in the stone beauty of numerous monasteries, churches, palaces, houses, towers, walls. In this nucleus of stone forms, a Benedictine monastery of St. Lucia found its place. The monastery tells its story that leaves no one indifferent. Its stormy past, which it has shared with the town and people, has been woven into each stone, well, nook and cranny. The permission for monastery establishment was given by Pope Urban VII in 1628, and it was actually established on December 13, 1639, following the execution of the will of a respectable Šibenik merchant, Nikola Buronja. 10 years later, plague attacked the monastery. Only 2 nuns survived, but with time the community revived. At the late 18th and early 19th century, 2 nuns came from abolished nunneries in the town into St. Lucia's monastery. Today, 12 nuns pray and work in St. Lucia's monastery in Šibenik. For centuries, nuns have been faithful guardians of spiritual and cultural heritage. They have never abandoned the monastery, not even in the toughest war times throughout the history when Šibenik defended itself from various invaders. During the Croatian Independence War too, when all of Šibenik was shelled, St. Lucia's monastery was also hit. In the monastery collection, offering at a small area a rich historical overview of the community's life, an honorable place is kept by a unique statue of Madonna and Child from the 13th century, made of terracotta. Except this valuable exhibit, the collection also preserves a painted 14th century crucifix. There are numerous icons and paintings, a lot of mass robes, chalices, monstrances, reliquaries, censers, other church inventory, jewelry, clocks, vases made of alabaster, Murano glass and porcelain. In the monastery church, which was renovated after the Croatian War of Independence, thanks to the generous donations of Benedictine brothers from Austria and Germany, there is a valuable little organ from 1638, Venetian and Dalmatian Baroque, the only preserved example of a kind in Dalmatia. Founded for poor girls, following the wish of the founder, the monastery has throughout the history faithfully responded to the entrusted task. From 1810 to 1908, St. Lucia's nun kept the only all-girls elementary school in Šibenik. At the 1889 Vatican exhibition, the Šibenik Benedictine Nuns School participated with its works and received a certificate of recognition and a bronze medal. The nuns then opened a craft school for older girls and a nursery for young children until 1946, when the communist authorities forbade the continuation of their educational activities. Today, the monastery is going through a stage of thorough renovation, which progresses largely depending on the generosity of benefactors. Besides the core liturgical prayer, which is the first and foremost duty of the religious daily life, the 12 nuns practice various activities and, apart from tending a little garden, make hosts for all of the diocese, knit, make souvenirs and traditional Šibenik caps, available to visitors in the monastery souvenir shop and gallery. St. Lucia's monastery has lived in the very heart of this stone pearl for 370 years, living persistently before God's face, the Benedictine motto, pray and work. Trogir is a historical town and harbour at the Adriatic coast. It is situated on a small island between the Croatian mainland and the island of Čiovo. It lies 27 kilometers west of the city of Split. Since 1997, the historical centre of Trogir has been included in the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites. In the 3rd century BC, Tragurion was founded by Greek colonists from the island of Vis, and it developed into a major port until the Roman period. The sudden prosperity of Salona deprived Trogir of its importance. During the migration of Slavs, the citizens of the destroyed Salona escaped to Trogir. From the 9th century on, Trogir paid tribute to Croatian rulers. The Diocese of Trogir was established in the 11th century, abolished in 1828, and annexed to the Split and Makarska archdiocese. Trogir's grandest building is the Church of St. Lawrence, whose main west portal is a masterpiece by Radovan and the most significant work of the Romanesque Gothic style in Croatia. Trogir has a high concentration of palaces, churches and towers, as well as a fortress on a small island. It is the best preserved Romanesque Gothic complex not only at the Adriatic, but in all of Central Europe. The monastery of the Benedictine nuns is situated by the south city walls. It was founded 900 years ago, and its foundation was mentioned in a document from the year 1064. The monastery was established with great support of the Trogir bishop St. Ivan. The monastery complex consists of several connected buildings, a medieval tower with a Renaissance balcony overlooking the sea, a part of the city walls and the church. In this ancient complex of buildings, one can identify Romanesque and Gothic characteristics, Renaissance and Baroque styles, and even some ramparts and stone fragments from the antiquity. The arches of the courtyard, 2 Romanesque windows plus the upper Gothic one with the pointed arch, decorate the picturesque monastery yard. In the wall above the first arch, a Greek epigraphical stole monument is built in, the only one conserved from the period when Trogir was a Greek settlement, and a second medieval inscription mentioning the Croatian and Hungarian king and Croatian Ban Petar Berislavić. Throughout the centuries, the monastery church of St. Nicholas has been rebuilt several times, its present appearance dating from the Baroque period. The Renaissance belfry, with its delicately chiseled lacy grids, is a 16th century work of the family members of the famous architect Trifun Bokanić from the island of Brač. The collection, belonging to the monastery, contains very valuable artistic works. The most outstanding piece among the exhibits is the well-known Greek bas-relief from the beginning of the 3rd century BC. The figure of the naked young man personifies Kairos. According to the ancient Greek comprehension, the god of the fleeting moment, a favorable opportunity opposing the fate of man. The Romanesque Madonna from the 13th century is the oldest painting in Trogir. It was restored quite recently, and after removing the silver and the 2 layers of paint, it obtained its original appearance. The painted Gothic crucifix, showing the influence of the Byzantine art, is attributed to the circle of the most famous 14th century Venetian painter Paolo Veneziano. The Gothic statue of Madonna with Child dates from the 15th century. The colored relief polyptych, a picture composed of several parts from the first half of the 15th century, represent Madonna with Child in luxuriously carved and gilded frame, with figures of saints at the sides. The Byzantine icon of the sorrowful Mother of God holding the crucifix in her hands dates from the 17th century and is considered to be the most valuable of the exhibited icons. 9 Baroque medallions with figures of saints were painted by the Venetian artist Nicola Grassi, the 18th century. In earlier times, these big oval paintings hung on the walls of the monastery church. The alabaster statuette of Pietà is a piece of artistic craftsmanship, probably an English work from the 15th century. Today, in the Trogir monastery of St. Nicholas, 6 Benedictine nuns continue to testify through their prayer and work the hope of the monastic vocation lived by the rule of St. Benedict in this school for the Lord's service for nearly 1,000 years. The town of Pharos, Hvar, was founded by the Ionian Greeks of Paros in the deepest inlet on the northern side of the island. It was in the year of 385 BC, in the 4th year following the 98th Olympic Games. Hvar was dominantly an agrarian colony, and it is still an island of famous vines, olives, lavender, figs, an island of vineyard keepers, fishermen and merchants. At the Roman times, the island of Hvar featured a whole net of agricultural and country houses in the vicinity of drinking water springs, while a greater concentration of buildings could be found in the region of today's towns of Hvar, Stari Grad and around Jelsa. In the early Middle Ages, Hvar used to belong to the region governed by the Neretljani Croats, along with the rest of the central Dalmatian islands. The Republic of Venice invaded Hvar in 1147 and thus established a diocese within the Zadar Archdiocese. At the 1185 split church synod, it was decided for the Hvar diocese to become part of the split archdiocese. Venice reconquered the island in 1278 and renovated the town at the place of today's Hvar, introducing their own bishop. In the year 1292, it was decided that walls should be built around the town and the monastery, which used to be the bishop's seat. The whole process ended in 1450. The Hvar diocese encompasses the central Dalmatian islands of Hvar, Brač and Vis, as well as a row of smaller islands. It numbers about 23,000 Catholics and covers the area of 311 square kilometers. The patron saint of the diocese is Saint Stephen I, Pope and Martyr. Built and rebuilt for centuries, the Hvar Cathedral, consecrated to Saint Stephen, had originally been a church of the male Benedictine monastery of St. Mary in Hvar. It became the cathedral in the 13th century, when the bishop moved his seat from Stari Grad to Hvar. At the main town square, the Hvar Theatre is situated, one of the first municipal theatres in Europe, founded in 1612. It was raised over the ancient arsenal, the area for repairing galleys, and a warehouse for all maritime equipment. The Benedictine monastery and the church of St. John the Baptist and St. Anthony the Abbot are situated in the house where in 1485 Hannibal Lucic was born, a Hvar squire, judge and lawyer of the Hvar town municipality. Julia, Hannibal's son Anthony's widow, left the family palace in her will for the future Benedictine monastery. the construction of which had been advocated by the town authorities since 1534 and supported by some Hvar citizens' deeds of donation. 2 nuns came to Hvar from the Rab monastery of St. Andrew in 1664 so that the Hvar monastery could start functioning. In the year of 1836, the Hvar commune asked for the Benedictine nuns to found an all-girls elementary school. The nuns accepted it, founded the school and led it for 60 years. In the period following the Second World War, the nuns also ran a nursery, making the mess robes at the same time and knitting. During the past 10 years or so, the nuns have had the monastery church renovated as well as the part of the house and the valuable monastery collection with the help of benefactors and the Ministry of Culture. The collection contains valuable paintings, mostly tempera on wood, among which the oldest one is the Adoration of the Magi from the 15th or 16th century and a few works from the 17th and 18th century. The Assumption of Our Lady, oil on copper, dates from the 18th century. The church silverware and various 17th and 18th century reliquaries are mostly of the Venetian and Dubrovnik origin. A valuable part of the collection are silk products and church robes. The collection also features goldsmith's tools, scales, little crosses and ornaments by Master Pavlovich from the 18th and 19th century. Along with the primarily spiritual character the monastery has spread in this area for centuries, it is particularly famous today all over the world for the agave lace, which is cherished only in the monastery, following a 100 to 120-year-old tradition and passed from generation to generation. Related to the use of agave fibers, there is a legend according to which a Neolithic man inhabiting the Grabčeva Špilja on the island of Hvar caught fish using nets made of agave fibers. The job of preparing the fibers is very tiresome. The procedure begins by picking agave leaves older than 3 years, after which the fibers, 1 meter long, are extracted from the leaves and are then specially processed and refined before lace can be produced. 3 kinds of lace can be differed depending on the manner of production. Today in the Hvar monastery there are 11 nuns who, living and cherishing Christian hospitality in this town of developed and elite tourism through their devoted prayer and work, testify their decision of living for God. In the 12th century, the Republic of Venice, on their way from a crusade, utterly destroyed the town of Beograd na Moru, ruining also the old monastery of St. John the Evangelist. This monastery had been founded in the year of 1059 or a little earlier by the Croatian King Petar Krešimir IV as a votive present. As soon as it was possible, the monks carried the definitive caput of the destroyed abbey onto the island of Pašman, 2 kilometers from the northwest from today's village of Tkon, onto the peak of the 95-meter high hill of Čokovac. They chose this picturesque place because they had already had a chapel of St. Cosmo and Damian there, given to them by the Beograd Archbishop Prestantius. Čokovac offers a broad view of the islands and the sea, as well as the mainland across Ravni Kotari and Vrana Lake, all the way to Velebit and Dinara Mounts. Čokovac has also been a strategically important position over the narrow Pashman Channel, just the same as the Abbey of St. Michael on Ugljan over the Zadar Channel. Both these monasteries have been secured with particularly strong walls and served Zadar as maritime fortress. The monks, having arrived to Čokovac, built a Romanesque church and monastery, out of which only a small part of Clauster has survived, located below the monastery bell tower, as well as a few fragments of the plated decoration from the times of the Croatian dynasty. The Romanesque church and monastery got destroyed in 1345. The main entrance with the statue of Madonna and Child was carved and the church completed in 1418 in Venetian Gothic style during the rule of Abbot Franjo Maripetar. The Pashman monks used the Slav language in liturgy and were thus also called Illyric monks, and their house Illyric or Golgothic Abbey. Among all the Benedictine monasteries in these regions, this one maintained Golgolithic letters in their service, longest and to the end. Among older Golgolithic manuscripts belonging to Pashman, fragments of a 13th century breviary have survived, missal fragments, and illuminated breviary, the Croatian translation of St. Benedict's rule, a summary of documents from the 14th century, and several excerpts from various centuries, whose parts are kept either here or abroad. Apart from that, Čokovac also houses a collection of inscriptions carved into stone in Golgolithic letters. 11 such examples have been found in the church or around. In the church, the most valuable work of art is a large Gothic crucifix painted on wood in the early 15th century. Its dimensions are 195 x 164 centimeters. It was painted by Venetian painter Meneghello Ivanov, who spent all his 40-year-long work life in Zadar. Apart from the crucifix, the monastery church also features a valuable icon of Madonna. There are also the only exhibits of a kind preserved after the abolishment and closing of the Čokovac Abbey by the French government in 1808. In October 1961, Čokovac became again the home of the Benedictine monks, and it was officially opened in 1965. From then to the end of the 1990s, slow and modest renovation of Čokovac took place with great help of the Benedictine monasteries from Austria and Germany, as well as help and support by the Ministry of Culture. The Čokovac monastery waited for a little over 150 years for the Benedictine monks to pray and work again within its walls.